Okay. So I've got Briana Kelly here. And to give a little bit of context to our talk today, Briana is James, who is an athlete that I coach. She is James's strength and conditioning coach. And we both met in Arizona because James completed a race called the Arizona Monster 300. So it was a multi-day race that covered 300 miles on the Arizona Trail. So thanks for connecting. I know we've been talking about this for quite some time to do a collaboration because it was really fun for me to be his running coach and you his strength and conditioning coach. And then we both ended up being able to be there in person. So it was really fun to meet you in person.
Yeah.
It was a really fun experience as well.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Rebecca. This is awesome. I think we have so much shared experience from that week with James in the desert. It was intense. It was fun. We got to know each other, and then with some of the other crew members there too, we just formed this awesome little family that was able to support James through probably one of the hardest weeks of his life.
Yeah, yeah,
And then did it. It was so cool to be part of that. And
yes,
also like that colliding of worlds of you as his running coach, who I've heard so much about, and then me as his strength coach coming together and able to share some of our knowledge is pretty special. So thanks for having me.
yeah. And you are based in Vancouver, Canada, which is where James is as well. And you are a co-owner of would you call it a boutique gym?
Yeah, so my business, alongside two other women named Andrea and Jess, is called Connected Strength. And we have a boutique gym in North Vancouver, which is the part of Vancouver where the mountains are. And we've been in business now for coming up on 6 years. Started just the three of us, and we've slowly expanded with a few other contractors as our demand for services has increased. And we do a lot of strength and conditioning and some rehab and everything kind of on the spectrum in between that. So we'll work with weekend warriors, we'll work with people who want to be really active, whether it's something like trail running or cycling or playing pickleball or just playing with their families and their kids. And we'll take them from whatever niggles and injuries they may have experienced and worked with the physio on into that level of functional strength where they feel comfortable tackling whatever life throws at them.
Hmm. And when did you start working with James?
So I started working with James only about 6 or 7 months ago because my colleague Andrea went on maternity leave, but she met James back in 2022. So it's been quite a while now. And the cool thing about our team is that we all have a very cohesive approach to training. We follow the same model, and we sometimes joke that we share a brain. So it was a really seamless transition. And when Andrea kicked off his strength plan before he ran his last big race and then post race to recover, and we found out he was going to do the monster, it just made a lot of sense that I would step in and fill that role when she stepped out.
Yeah, so he's been at your gym for 4 years, 4+
Yeah,
years.
for 4 years. And he was actually referred by his wife, Claire, who had been training with us for about a year prior to that. And I was trying to remember how Claire found us because they'd literally just moved from Cape Town like a month or two before. So I'll have to check in with her. It could have been as simple as a Google search, or maybe she met someone in the community. Anyway, but Claire was there, and she's become such a huge advocate for us. And one of her first referrals was James.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So what were your initial thoughts when he told you that he had signed up for a 300-mile race?
Internally, it was like, whoa, I've never even heard of a race that long before.
Yeah.
But after that, it was like, oh my God, we want our clients to set these epic goals. So yes, James, like this is cool. Let's do it. Okay, how far away is that? Okay, we have like a year and a bit to train for that. Like, okay, we got this. Yeah, epic goals are fun. Let's work backwards from there, and you can do it.
Yeah. And when he told you about the goal and you know that you had like a year to prep, how did you sort of do the planning in terms of what you thought he needed to accomplish from a strength and conditioning standpoint?
Yeah, so this is when Andrea was still his primary head coach, but I can confidently say that I would have done the same thing here because when I took over, it aligned very nicely with her plan. Um, it was pretty soon after his last big race, the Divide 200, which was another massive mountain race, when he decided he wanted to do this. So it was like, okay, phase one, we're going to work out any niggles and rehab stuff that needs to be done after such a massive event like that. And then it was like, okay, let's plan for the next year here. All of our plans need to be a little bit fluid. So we're not working with professional athletes who can devote all of their time to training. We're working with people that have families, work stress, other things, other hobbies going on in their life. And if we were to stick to a super strict regimen, that's where injuries are going to happen. It's not going to be conducive to um, meeting their training goals or even enjoying the process. So we started to create a pretty fluid periodized plan that began with technique and movement competency and some of those big compound movements. Like as a runner, James and others tend to be very good at things like step ups, lunges, squats, very sport specific knee and quad dominant movements. But it's like, okay, how can we add some variability to your movement patterns, teach you how to use your hips and hinge properly, even building in some upper body strength and some core. Let's put these big movement patterns together into practice and start to build your capacity for them. So with that, it leads into more like muscular endurance. So that would have been the next phase. Okay, now you can do these movements well. Now let's add a little bit more load, a few more reps, and get you to the point where you're starting to feel a little bit more fatigue. From muscular endurance, then we'll progress into more of like a peak strength and power output phase. And that's the fun one. That's where you see things like heavier deadlifts, heavier squats and lunges, even things like chin-ups, push-ups. Like we tend to program more like using the lens of what we'll call functional movement patterns. And those are things that we do in our day-to-day life anyway. So things like pushing, pulling, bending down, carrying, sitting to standing. But if we translate that into gym terminology, it is things like pull-ups, push-ups, deadlift, squat, farmer's carry, all these things. So anyway, saying that, with James, we wanted to build a little bit more peak strength in a lot of those movements without taking away from his running. And I think we did a good job of that. Like there were always a few niggles that would pop up here and there. Like he's a normal human. He'd get some IT band stuff or something in his hip or his hamstring or whatever. But we were able to balance that peak strength with enough prehab and specific mobility type stuff that he could manage the load. But saying this focus on peak strength and power, like we didn't want to do that too close to his race day. So this was still like 6+ months out. Once we completed that phase, then it was like, okay, how can we coast and maintain in a fun, sustainable way as his running and hiking volume increases? So we're not taking away from that. We want this to be a really cohesive system where we're not overstimulating his nervous system, his joints, his tissues, so that he can get the most out of everything. So in that next period of training, and this is kind of where I came in about 6-7 months ago. This is where, 6-7 months prior to his race is when I came in. So this is where it was like, let's focus on those other movement patterns that maybe you're not getting in your day-to-day life and your running and hiking training. So thoracic mobility, like someone who sits at a desk all day and wears a running vest, they're often in this slightly hunched position. They don't get a lot of rotation. They don't get a lot of extension or even like overhead reaching kind of movements. So we worked a lot on that. We did a ton of core. And when I say core, it's like not crunches and sit-ups. Like those aren't the super functional core exercises that are going to apply to something like trail running. We want to create an appropriate amount of stability and pressure around the spine to stabilize it against different stressors. So in
Yeah.
this case, we actually did a lot of anti-extension work, because when you're running, your gait is going to push you forward a little bit. The ribs want to flare. You're wearing a heavy pack. It's trying to pull you out of that neutral position. So with things like barbell rollouts, lots of dead bug variations, learning how to manage stability and pressure in a place where you can still breathe through it. So that became
Mm-hmm.
a big focus. And then on top of that, in that final phase, it was like, he is training a lot on his feet. So let's just manage those niggles. You know, he sees physio every couple of weeks. They might say, okay, this is what's tight, this is what's dysfunctional. We can tackle that in the gym. And that's the beauty of being an experienced strength and conditioning coach, where it's not just about the big lifts. It's like, okay, we have the knowledge to do some of this very specific targeted mobility prehab activation type stuff too. And we spent a lot of time using that as his warm-ups, say, in the gym. And that all came together in a nice little package where he was able to maintain his big strength gains, some power, his balance, his agility, and didn't have too many other things flare up that maybe would have, just as being a human being who sits at a desk and has a family and tries to run for many hours in his spare time. So
Yeah.
yeah.
It's funny because you're now, I think, the second strength and conditioning coach that I've spoken to with people I coach who have said, hey, when running volume increases and we're in that kind of peak volume phase, it's just about maintaining the strength that you gained. And I think some runners don't realize that they have to not necessarily back off in the gym, but it's more about just maintaining what the gains you've made. You can't make gains everywhere at the same time because it is too much on the body and the
Yeah,
nervous.
exactly. And along those lines, the consistency of showing up to the gym is still really important, because you will start to lose some of those gains if you start sacrificing days in the gym to go and be in the trails and run. Now, I say that with a bit of a caveat, as long as you're still getting your recovery days. I would say from my experience that, say someone is in the gym in their off season, like 3 to 4 days, and now they need to increase their running to 4 to 6 days in the week. Sure, you can let one of those gym days drop. 2 is probably that minimum effective dose. But yeah, so James was able to stay with us 2 days a week. One day he'd have a private session where we'd work on all those things that are very specific to him. And then one day a week, he'd join one of our small groups where it was a little bit more general strength, but he was still able to tailor that to his needs in that moment without taking away from his running.
Yeah. Yeah. I know when we talked in Arizona, you had mentioned that you had encouraged James to take more rest in between sets. Do you want
Yeah.
to explain? Because runners they don't want to take much rest. They want to be like 10 seconds and then go again.
Totally. So yeah, runners tend to be very guilty of having this mindset of, oh, I'm well trained, I have great endurance, I'm just gonna do all my sets in a row. But it's like, okay, stop and take a breath here. What is our goal? Is our goal to get stronger, or is our goal to just do some movements and have a sweat to maybe be sore tomorrow? I would say in a high performance situation with James, like, we want to get stronger. So in order to do that, just like with running, we need to rest. We need to let our body recover, our nervous system recover. James and I would always joke about this, because he'd do his set of, say, 5 to 8 moderately heavy deadlifts, and he'd step away from the bar and he's like, okay, I'm ready to go. I'm like, no, like, let's start talking about maps or trails on the North Shore or anything else to try to, distract, get him talking for a couple minutes.
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, looking at my watch, 2 to 3 minutes. Okay, I'm good with that. Let's get back into this next set. But a lot of people do miss the mark with the relatively heavy strength training. In order to reap the benefits of that, we do need to take 2 to 4 minutes to rest, because our goal is to repeat the same effort or even perform a little bit better with each subsequent set. If we don't take that rest, just like running intervals, very likely your performance is going to start to deteriorate. And at that point, we're not teaching our body what we want it to do. on race day. We wanted to be able to maintain that repeatable effort for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And the way our sessions were structured, just because we had the time constraint of about an hour, I would pick one primary move each day. And that probably took up 15 to 20 minutes of the session, between the max 2 minutes it took to do his set of lifts, and then the 2 to 3 minutes of rest, right? As soon as you start doing 4 or 5 sets in there, like, that's a significant amount of time. So I think to educate the runner or educate the athlete that this is why we're doing it, this is why it's important, then they can get on board too. Though sometimes you have to have a little distracting conversation to keep them occupied.
Yeah. Yeah. So in the peak strength phase that you were talking about, this is when the extra rest was especially important, because the goal was to make strength gains.
Exactly. Yeah.
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 So actually, it surprised me when we were at Arizona. So it took James, I think the allotted time to finish the 300 miles was 7 days, and James completed it in 6 days. So you were there as a strength and conditioning coach. You also did quite a lot of pacing, and you were also part of the crew support. So, you played a lot of different roles. It was really fun for me to watch you in person with James, because I didn't realize how much body work that you did with James, and maybe speak to a little bit. I remember one situation where his pack was really heavy, because it was a lot of time in between aid stations, sometimes like 6 to 8 hours. So his pack was really heavy, and you had given him this tip of, breathe through your lower back to help stabilize his back. And I was so surprised at how well his lower back held up. Like, he just didn't really complain about low back pain, even though it was such a long race and his pack was so heavy. So maybe speak to a little bit about, your breathing tips and kind of how you helped his body kind of stay in one piece during the race.
Yeah, totally. That became a big focus of our training between his last big race and this Arizona Monster, because he had experienced some low back pain when he did the divide. So just a little bit of background on the anatomy of this here. So in our trunk and our torso, we have our rib cage, right? So it forms a nice ring of the ribs, and we have our pelvis, which forms a nice ring underneath that. We have our diaphragm that sits in the base of the ribs, pelvic floor that sits in the pelvis, and we have our transabs that kind of circle around to create a canister. And our goal with core work in general, what we call core work, is to optimize the function of that canister to resist external forces. And breath becomes a really big tool there. So when we take 10,000 breaths a day, every time we breathe, that diaphragm contracts and it pulls down, creating pressure against the pelvic floor. That system there, that's called your intra-abdominal pressure. And that intra-abdominal pressure creates a ton of stability around the lumbar spine, the ribs, the pelvis. And without even thinking about turning your core muscles on, you already have this baseline level of stiffness to work against. So when James is now carrying a heavy pack, he's fatigued, he's going into day 5, it's like, okay, you can probably see his posture start to change. He doesn't have the mental capacity to think about correcting that, right? Or what muscles do I need to be using to stand up a little bit taller? So therefore, that's where the breath cue comes in. It's like, okay, James, we've worked on this. Remember, think about breathing down low into your sides, into your belly, into your low back. Let's try to get this 360-degree expansion, which will naturally help hold you a little bit more neutral and help you resist those external forces.
Right.
With that whole pressurized system too, one of the biggest mistakes we'll see is people will like suck in or do something to offset the the integration of that system. So especially with fatigue, right? When James is bowing forward and, it changes the shape of that can. It's kind of like if you have a can of Coke and you were to puncture the side and stand on the top, all of a sudden that's just going to crush. There's no integrity left. But if we can keep that pressurization system intact, it's going to build a lot of stability. So in James's case, by the time I started giving him those cues, like I say, he didn't have much capacity left. He was just surviving and putting one foot in front of another. So he was able to fall back on all those training principles that we had through repetition, just ingrained with great motor control, that he was able to do it pretty automatically with just a little bit of a reminder.
So would a practical tip for someone first trying to do this, would it be doing it like at an aid station, or while you're hiking on the trail, would you actually try and do a few deep breaths and then sort of go back to a normal pattern? Or is it something that you're wanting to try and do with nearly every breath?
Yeah, good question. In a perfect world, we probably want to do it with most breaths. Though saying that, we don't want to have to think about breathing for an extended period of time. So I would say when you have that moment of clarity, whether it's at an aid station and you're sitting in a chair, or you're out on the trail and you have a moment of like, okay, let's touch base with my body. That's where you could take a couple extra deep breaths, sit tall, try to stack your posture. We want those ribs over top of the hips, and take a nice deep nasal breath, a diaphragmatic breath that you feel that expansion, sides, low back, belly. Pause for a second and passively let it back out. And the other beautiful thing about diaphragmatic breathing is it helps shift the dial on the nervous system, on that autonomic nervous system, from the sympathetic stress state more towards the parasympathetic, which is our rest, digest, heal, learn new patterns. And in such a long event like this, of course, he's going to be more on that sympathetic side of things. But if we can shift the dial even a little bit back towards the parasympathetic, that's going to be a huge win.
Yeah, definitely. I've heard Jay Deshari is a physio that works with a lot of runners, and he's written some books, and he talks a lot about stacking the ribs on the pelvis in movements and with running. So that's really interesting that you had that cue as well, and thinking about that, because I think as ultra runners especially, posture gets compromised as fatigue sets in, because it's such like full mind and body fatigue. So having those cues and someone there to help with those cues was huge for him, and all the work that you guys did together leading up to the event.
It was pretty cool to see that put into practice in such a successful way, because we had worked on that for many months or years even. Like, to be honest, that's one of the first skills we'll teach when we meet a new client in the gym. They want to come in, they want to throw some weights around and do some high intensity stuff. And we're like, hey, no, we're probably going to spend the first few weeks lying on the floor and learning how to breathe properly. Because when you're on the floor, lying on your back with your knees bent and your feet planted, you get a ton of feedback. So it's like you can feel that you're able to press your mid back, your ribs into the floor without compromising the shape of your neutral spine. You can breathe into your belly, sides, low back there. And only once you can do that reasonably well will we move you into maybe all fours or a kneeling position, and then eventually standing. But that's one of our non-negotiables, is learning how to properly align that canister stack and then breathe within it. So again, pretty cool to see it come into practice in something this intense.
And it may have been specific to James, but the Theragun really came into practice when it was about body work, and you were like the Theragun appointed Theragun person. So James had this like mini Theragun. It was quite small. So he actually had it in his pack with him. I think you were doing Theragun on his feet and other spots. Like, what do you feel like that contributed to him? Because it seemed like that was just this thing that he was so excited about, and it kind
Yeah.
of like got him through. It seemed like.
So to set the scene, James loved the Theragun. He'd had an experience in one of his past races, I think, where he had decided to try using it to pound some life back into his feet, as he put it. And it got to the point where, like, this Theragun, it's a dense little piece of equipment. Like, it weighs quite a bit. And he would put that in his pack and carry it with him through all those long sections. So anyway, we would use that Theragun as a way to just get the fluid circulating again. So it's a lot of time on feet, right? So if he could sit down and get his feet up, and we could use that percussion just to improve the blood flow, get a little bit of circulation, or improve the circulation in those tissues, I think anything will help us push the dial in the right direction at that point. But things like that, whether it's a Theragun or using a ball or a foam roller, all of that soft tissue release stuff, the real effect it's having is actually on the nervous system. So it's helping almost desensitize those tissues or bring some awareness to the area. It's not breaking down knots or adhesions or anything like that, but it's just telling the brain, like, hey, you're okay. Like, you can relax, let some of that tension go. And in James's case, by doing the feet like that, the feet are so interconnected with the rest of the chain through the fascial networks. So when we add a little bit of massage to the bottom of the feet, it's very likely that he's going to experience some benefits all the way up the chain, whether it be calves, hamstrings, glutes, posterior back, up even into the neck and the shoulders. And I can just remember being on the side of the Tucson bike path where James and I spent an entire night walking through the city. And he's like, I need a break. Can you massage my feet? I was like, yes, I can, because you're carrying this little Theragun. Let's pull it out of your pack. And, we spent 5 minutes just giving his feet a little bit more life. But yeah, pretty funny. There was another aid station where we showed up, and he again asked, do you mind doing some Theragun? So I think I was working on his shoulders, and I did the bottoms of his feet, and he was working down his legs a little bit. And one of the volunteers at the aid station came over, and they're like, where did you get that? And he's like, oh, I've been carrying it in my pack. And the look on this man's face, you're carrying that over 300 miles? James was just so content and confident. He's like, yeah, it makes such a difference for me.
He really wanted that. I think, like whatever it is for people, that sort of gives them a bit of mental boost as well as a physical boost. And for him, that really, he knew that was going to help him feel better. It was pretty funny. And, you did pacing sections over multiple days, and you did a full night. Although it was a trail race and almost all of it was on trail, there was this long section on the bike path through Tucson. And you did that section with him, and then you also did the last 20Ks, 25Ks with him into the finish line. Speak to maybe what it was like pacing over multiple days, because I think most people, if you're pacing 100 mile, you kind of know, okay, I'm going to be doing the night section and that's it. But you did a whole night, and you had kind of like a day, to recover, and you went again.
Yeah. It's funny because going into this week, I myself was training for an ultra. I had a 100K race coming up, and my coach had said to me, of course, get out on the trail and do some pacing, but I don't want you to do this section. And that section was the 70K through the bike path in the middle of the city. And she's like, if you absolutely have to, that's it. No more pacing. I was like, okay. And then, of course, our crew team sits down for a meeting, and we're drafting sections and figuring out the logistics. And I was like, okay, well, guess I'm doing that long section, and there's a chance I'll do the one a couple days later too. It's like, here we are. I'm ready to go. Anyway, the idea of pacing over several days, I can imagine, is probably a very different mindset than a single solid outing. I haven't done that before, pacing something like a 100 miler and having just that one day. But it meant that as much as I had to think about James's well-being, I also had to think about my own recovery and my own body's needs.
Yeah.
So when I started my first pacing section, due to a number of different factors, it was probably 3 or 4 hours later than we'd expected to start, because that was where James spent a little longer at that aid station. So I set off at, I want to say around midnight, or maybe like 12:30 a.m. we started. So middle of the night. Luckily, that meant it was much cooler because we were on a paved path for the next 50 plus kilometers. So with that, I planned my own fuel. I'd been training with something in my system every 30 minutes minimum, some carb drink mix, and budgeting that sort of thing so that I knew that I would be able to perform, to be there for James. As the sun came up in the morning, we came up to a great aid station, music blasting, food cooked to order, and James immediately fell asleep. So while James was sleeping, it was like, okay, well, here's my opportunity. I'm going to have the food that they're offering. I had, I think, one of the best bacon cheeseburgers of my life at 7:30 a.m. on the side of the highway, and was able to close my eyes for about 10 minutes while James slept for close to an hour that time. But that meant that when James woke up, I was a little bit more refreshed too. So got the Theragun out, was able to do some work on his feet, made sure that he had what he needed from a fuel perspective. So I was the one running to the volunteers at the aid station table. Okay, I'm going to put this food order in, and let's fill his bladder here, bring it back to James, making sure that he didn't have to do more work than necessary, because by that point, he had very little mental capacity left. And then we finished out that day. I think the sun was going down, so it was probably around dinner time, maybe 8 o'clock. So it was a long day. And I know I slept in the van the whole way home back to the Airbnb we were staying at, because there was a chance I was going to have to go out about a day and a half later. So for myself, that whole next day was like, okay, I'm going to elevate my feet while I sleep. I'm going to, I love to use a cream called Trauma Care, which is a homeopathic. It's a mix of arnica, calendula, and some other anti-inflammatory, anti-swelling, and circulation promoting compounds. So I like to lather my ankles and my knees in that, and woke up in the morning feeling tired, but pretty good. So it's like, okay, I'm going to get on the foam roller myself. I'm going to do lots of stretches, going to try to stay off my feet and, fuel really well for recovery. And sure enough, Liz, our other pacer, she had been out with James for quite a long section after that. And we got a text from her that she was ready to tap out. And it was like, okay, Brie, you're up. You're going to do the last 25. And I was like, okay, I can do that. So I think having my own strength training background probably played a huge role in that, in the resilience and being able to recover and bounce back so quickly. So then by the time I went into that final day, it was much more trail, a lot more up and down than we both anticipated, even though we'd both been studying that map. So I was able to push enough that I was getting James moving at a good pace. And then in the last 5K, he decided, I'm ready to run. And I think I said something to him like, okay, here's your chance to empty the tank, leave everything you have in the race. And you could see that click. And all of a sudden, he just got moving. I was like, okay, well, I guess I'm running now too. So there we are, chasing James to the finish line. And both of us, I think, came across obviously stoked, but feeling pretty good. And that was awesome. But as a pacer, at least in an event like this, again, not having done something shorter, you end up wearing a lot of different hats. You're not just the cheerleader. You are also in a way, a caregiver to like a toddler who can't figure out their needs and wants, and they're maybe not in the best mood, though sometimes they are, and you're just a person that can manage that with your athlete, stay positive, keep them moving forward, and have some of that intuition to figure out what do they actually need, and is it the same as what they are trying to communicate that they need, because they're not always the same thing.
That's right. That's so true. That's so true. They do become fixated on certain needs that, don't really match with what you feel like he needs.
Totally. And I think even things like fuel, where James would ask for certain foods that we would show up with at the next aid station, whether it be fresh fruit or nuts or just more bars and snacks. But as soon as you were to spend some extended time with him, you could pretty clearly see, okay, maybe those are a little Band-Aid solution, but he needs some real food. So the beauty of being a pacer on course with him is you can show up to the aid stations and he would probably never serve himself a full plate of real food himself, but I was able to go over and request something that I knew James would like. And maybe it was getting into the heat of the day and it's like, I know he needs salt. So we're going to create a big plate of hash browns and potatoes and load it up with a ton of salt, maybe put a bit of ketchup on that to make it palatable, and bring it back to James, and he'd eat the whole thing. And then he'd go for seconds.
Right.
So having the ability to step in and take care of him that way was pretty cool. And I think that's probably one of the keys to his success and why he was still moving so well by day 6.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. I remember feeding him a plate of cheese and bacon at one aid station.
Yeah. Totally.
As the days goes on, it's finding just the densest calories possible. And that's not going to be a bar.
No, definitely not.
Yeah. And I think too, for context, we had 2 pacers, and then we had 2 people that were just crew. So we had 4 people taking care of one person, and I feel like all 4 people we really needed with a multi-day event. So there were some people that we met at the race where there was maybe only 1 or 2 people supporting, and so they were doing a lot of crewing and a lot of pacing, which I think would just be extremely exhausting because all of us were exhausted as it is.
Yeah, Rebecca, you did a fantastic job of being our crew chief. So you didn't set foot on course pacing, but you were in charge of the timing, the logistics, who goes where, when, where we need to drive, when we need to show up, and our kit that we brought with us in the car. And I think that was incredible. So then we could be your assistants in whatever form that was on any given day. And Sean was a driver. How far did he drive in those 7 days? Probably twice the length of the course.
Yeah, I think it was like 1,000 miles. It was, it was
so
a lot.
He was our shuttle driver, plus our crew member helping out at the aid stations. Like, he was exhausted. And then between Liz and I, Liz with her medical background as a doctor, like, she was able to step up and deal with things like blisters and foot care, and even that James ended up with a cut on his leg that was showing signs of infection, and she was the one who could make a call on what we needed to do with that. So I think everyone had a good role within the team. We distributed the responsibilities pretty well, but despite that, with 4 of us, we were exhausted by the end of it.
Yeah, I think what surprised me, I mean, it wasn't a surprise, but then when you're in it, you don't realize how tiring it is because you can't control what time he's going to come into the aid station. And their GPS trackers worked really well. But, we were setting alarms for 1, 2 in the morning. And then the next day, he would be getting to an aid station at like 10 or 11 p.m. So it was, everyone's sleep cycles were out of whack. James most of all. But all of us were, the sleep schedules were super weird.
Totally. And on top of that, like we have the estimated timing of when we think he might get there, you know, from when he leaves the last station, but you don't truly know. There's a window of error there of hours. So
Mm.
you in particular, but all of us would be checking that tracker like hourly through the day, through the night, just to make sure we were on track.
Right.
And the other piece in a race this long, sometimes the aid station would be a 2+ hour drive from where we were staying. So
Yeah.
budgeting that commute time in was massive, like highway driving plus a desert or forest service road for another 40 minutes, you
Right.
know? So it wasn't as if we could just look at the spreadsheet and say, okay, we need to be here at this time because James will arrive perfectly. Like that's never the case. So
Right.
the mental load for you in particular, but all of us from that perspective was pretty huge.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Um, I mean, I think we were all so excited when he was able to finish because there's so many things that are out of people's control.
Yeah.
It was extremely hot, and he
Mhm.
was coming from Vancouver in March, which is not
Yeah.
very hot in March.
No.
And it
He'd
was,
done a lot of winter training in the rain and some
yeah,
snow in the mountains.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then, end of March, early April, it was well over 100 degrees Fahrenheit.
Mhm.
And it was he managed that very, very well. And maybe it's just his genetics that he was able to,
Yeah.
manage it. But he did finish. And then, you sort of saw and maybe still are seeing his recovery from such a
Mhm.
long event.
Mhm.
Um, and then there's always these groups of ultra runners that like doing multiple really big events in a
Yeah.
year.
Yeah.
Maybe speak a little bit towards the importance of his recovery, and maybe in general with ultra runners, the importance of taking adequate recovery after something like this.
Mhm. Yeah, when you finish a big event like this, the load on your nervous system, it's unbelievable, right? Our bodies are so smart and so capable that they will do whatever they need to do to make that task happen. So not just little muscular compensation patterns, but who knows what other systems in your body are going to be depleted after something this huge. So from that perspective, it's going to be months until you're totally recovered from an event like this. Even if you can walk normally within 3, 5, 6 days, like that doesn't mean that you're recovered. So now here we are in July and the race was in April. Like we're months out, and I would say our programming is still focused on recovery. So we do
Mm,
a good amount of active mobility, prehab. We're still working through some of those old normal niggles for James, not race related, but things that maybe we can use this as an opportunity to spend more time addressing. We haven't
yeah.
done any peak strength, we haven't done any peak power output, but we're gradually adding in more of those compound movements again at
Mm,
moderate loads. And when I say that, it's something heavy enough that you can do 8 to 10 reps with a few left in the tank. So it's nothing super heavy, nothing super challenging, keeping that effort no higher than a 7 out of 10.
mhm.
But with that, he's able to allow his system to recover. So it was interesting actually because obviously a few of the big ultras just happened. We had Western States and then Hard Rock, and I think it was Tara Dower did both, and they were
Mhm,
about a week apart. And
mhm,
I was trying to imagine how resilient her body is and what she had to go through to make that happen. And
mhm.
I think something like that comes from building your foundation over many, many, many years because you're with that huge base, your pyramid, right? Your peak just gets higher and higher and higher. And the relative effort needed to complete an event like that is perhaps just slightly less than what your max output could be. But in James's case, he has the same tenure in many, many years of doing these long races. So
Yeah.
though finishing the Monster 300 was a max effort and a max output, he will have the capacity to do other long events, I would say, within the year if he wanted to do something fun, local or another race of some kind, because of that base and the time that he's put into his recovery. But it's really incredible to me at the end of the day how resilient our bodies are and what we can bounce back from.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm really glad that you said you're still working on recovery, 3 months out, because from a running perspective, he didn't run for 2 months. He did walks and things like that once he was ready. And he's only now starting to get back into running, but volume is still low.
Yeah.
And that, I think, speaks to why he's able to, he has done, a few years ago, he did his first 100, and then a couple years ago, he did a 200-mile event in Canada, and then Arizona Monster. So he does take his recovery very seriously, and that probably allows him to be able to take the next step, rather than, some ultra runners burn super bright for a few years, and then it's overloaded the system and they weren't able to recover, or injuries that just don't go away. And then it's kind of, you really have to pace yourself when it comes to those types of events, and not getting too greedy or too excited with ultra sign up, or
Totally.
on social media too. You always see, like Andy Glaze does all these events like in a year, and it's like, oh, maybe I could do it too. And then it's a bad idea for 99% of people.
Totally. Well, and you have to think too that, like, what other stressors are stimulating the system in your day-to-day life, in your normal routine? Sure, we like most normal people, they work a full-time job, they have family commitments, they have other things going on in their life, and they're fitting in their ultra training around that and trying to make it sustainable in a way where you can juggle all the different balls, right? So when you look at someone like Andy Glaze and some of these more like social media type ultra runners that are extremely like impressive in their performances, but what other stressors are they dealing with? We don't know. Do they have to do their own meal prep? Do they sit at a desk for 6 or 8+ hours a day? Like, what else is going on in their life? And I think very often a lot of these runners, that is their full-time job, right? So when they're working, they're training, and when they're resting, they can truly rest, where not everybody has that luxury, right?
Yeah. Occasionally there will be like a pro trail runner who'll sort of do a day in the life, and they're like, did a little bit of computer work, and it's like 90 minutes. And I was like, oh wow, like I'm on the computer like 10 hours a day. Like, maybe that's why I feel really tired doing my 60-minute workout, and they did a 5-hour workout, because they only had work for 90 minutes. So
exactly. I feel the same. Like, in the nature of my work, I'm in a gym, so I don't have as much computer time, but I'm truly moving weights around, lifting weights all day. I set up barbells on the hour, every hour for people. And I get to the end of the day and it's like, well, I probably moved like 1,000 pounds today or more. And now I'm going to go do my hill workout. So finding, like, just being realistic and figuring out what is sustainable for you. And the term we use in the gym very often is that minimum effective dose. How much stress can we put on the body so that we are shifting the dial forward in a positive way, but we're not exceeding our capacity and exceeding our threshold for stress, which will then knock us back another run.
Yeah, for sure. I love the concept of minimum effective dose, and I've used that successfully with busy working recreational runners for years and years, and it truly it speaks to helping people achieve longevity in sport, which
Mhm.
I think is key, right? Like
Mhm.
helping people do what they love for as long as possible.
Mhm.
That's gold. Yeah,
Yeah,
to me. Yeah.
exactly.
Well, I had so much fun with you in Arizona, and I think we created like memories that will last a lifetime. And I think we also like laughed until our bellies hurt. Um, so we will have to get the gang back together for an adventure at some point. Maybe not next year, but the year after.
Yeah,
We'll have something up his sleeve. I heard maybe in the Alps.
I did hear a rumor of that.
Yeah.
Maybe a couple years from now, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
I'll be there. We had so much fun. I'll be there.
Yeah. Yeah. And Liz knows Italian, so she's gonna be there.
Perfect.
Well, how can people stay in touch with you or follow you if they're interested in learning more about you as a coach and your business?
Yeah, so our website is connectedstrength.com. That's KIN, Connected Strength. And we also have an Instagram. So at Connected Strength, and then my personal one, feel free to follow, is at Briana Kelly Coach. And we we'll share some of the ins and outs of what's going on at our gym there, and every once in a while we'll share some client stories. But the reality of having a small business is you're working in your business, and sometimes you don't post, and that means you're busy in the work you're doing. But we try to stay on top of that. So
Cool. Well, I
yeah,
really appreciate your time, and it was really nice chatting.
thanks for having me. Nice to see you and reminiscing about our epic adventure.
Cool. We'll
Thanks,
chat soon.
Rebecca. Yeah.
Bye.